Hello and welcome to the S79 Sewing Studio. So today I'm going to be showing you how to make this simple summer cover-up dress from headscarves. This dress is made from two headscarves. I've got two here. These particular headscarves can be purchased from charity shops. I believe they're the headscarves that ladies like to wear on their heads. Hello! Sort of thing. So I've managed to get two the same. So these two are the ones I'm going to be using today to show you the tutorial. But just to talk about the dress, it's a really simple dress. It's cut on the bias, so it's got lots of room to move in. It's light, it's cool. It fastens with a tie, so it can be adjusted to fit. Nice and snug, and can be worn with an optional belt, which I haven't made for this particular prototype, but obviously can be pulled in at the waist there. It's got this lovely point down the front, comes up at the sides, and again a nice point at the back. So it's really simple to construct this item of clothing using just a straight stitch on a sewing machine. So let's go over to the table and we'll start working. So here we have the scarf laid out. My scarf is approximately 77 centimetres by 75 centimetres. It's not an exact square. They're not always exact squares. Obviously, if you're using anything smaller, then the dress that you make from this will be smaller. If you're using a larger one, then obviously you'll have more fabric to play with. This seems to work quite nicely for a nice cover-up. Obviously, depending on the size that you're making out of it, will depend how high it comes up at the sides. So I have my two squares here that I'm going to be working on. These are two squares that are the same. You could use, these are scarves, as I mentioned earlier. You could use any square of fabric, but you do generally want something that's quite lightweight with a nice amount of drape on it, so that you can cut on that lovely bias and get a nice draped dress. If you use something like a stiff cotton, it won't hang quite as well really, but satin or something similar, silk, will work just as well. Burnt myself on the iron earlier. Right. So let's get started. So on this dress, all the seams are going to be French seams. So the seams will be folded and encased within a seam on the inside. So in order to do that, all we need is a simple straight stitch, and there'll be beautifully sealed up seams on the inside that won't fray. I'm going to lay out the square, the one square, and we're going to lay it out so that the right side is facing down. So we have the wrong side facing up to us. So we can tell it's the wrong side because the pattern's slightly faded, the print isn't as strong, and also the actual turning around the edges on the scarf, the hem, you can feel the edge of the hem has been turned to the wrong side. So you can tell that. I'm going to make this the top because it's got this beautiful flower. This is going to be the bottom because there's another beautiful large flower, and these we may lose, but we'll be using those in the strap that goes around the neck. So I'm taking the other scarf that I have, and I am now placing this, just double check, so I'm placing this right side up, and again I want to just turn it so that the flowers that I want at the top and at the top of the back and at the bottom are lined up. Now because it's not quite a square, we can't line it up absolutely perfectly because I'm doing it slightly different. I want to make sure these are both on the same, so just line it up as best I can. Mainly at the top and the bottom, it'll just make life a bit easier. There we are. Okay. So we're going to start off by putting the side seams in. So we're going to work out exactly on the body what side seams we're in. So I'm going to call on Miriam, my lovely Miriam, to show you how to take the measurements. So here we have the lovely Miriam. So what I want to do is I want to measure the widest part around the bust and the widest part around the hips to make sure that the dress will float over those areas. So we're taking it around the widest part of the bust, so all the way around, and that's measuring up at 90 centimetres, just make sure it's nice and wide. I'm going to allow a couple of centimetres ease, so I'm going to go for 92 centimetres around there, and then let's just do a quick check on the hips. Just measure your widest area between here and your hips. You want to really find the widest area that you've got and measure that, just to make sure it all flows nicely over the body. So it's coming up 93. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a few centimetres on. I'm going to go for 98. just to make sure it flows nicely. You can taper it if you're particularly small at the top half and you want it to flow out so it's wider over the hips. Everybody's shape is different, so it really doesn't matter, but this is such an easy dress to do. You can taper it, so if this is the top, you can go smaller at the top and taper your line outwards in a diagonal to make it wider for the hips. I'm going to do it straight down just because I'm doing it for this set model. Obviously this is a standard size model, so it's not true of everybody's shape. So if you have a larger bust, you'll make it wider at the top, narrower further down, and vice versa, depending on your shape. So what I'm going to do is take the 97, which is the hip measurement that I allowed for with ease. I'm going to fold the tape measure in half so that it's sitting at 97 and it's folded in half. Okay, so obviously that comes to 48 and a half, I had to check. So I'm going to put this across here, like this, and I'm just going to make sure that I put a pin in at the point at which that's meets there. So at the point at which it meets the edge, popping a pin in, and a point at which it meets that edge. Again, it's better to probably overestimate at this stage. You can always take it in a bit. Two sections are pinned straight across there. Just make sure that's nice and straight. Okay, so straight across the top corner is where we're going to start the line. I'm going to go down to the point at which it finishes. And again, we're going to take this straight the way across. So it's half, the widest part of your body is marked out on here with 2 pins either side. 2 pins either side. There we are. So what we're going to do is we're going to stitch down both of these lines, which will create this tube effect in the middle. But to do that, I'm just going to take my ruler and mark a line on this one. Now this is the outer side, so we need to make sure that we allow a little bit of seam allowance because we're doing that French seam. I would always exercise on the side of caution, so make it a little bit bigger than you need to. It's far easier to take in than to make it too small and you're trying to either add bits or it goes in the bin. So we're just allowing 1.5 centimetres extra. I'm doing it by eye. Using tailor's chalk to mark this all the way down. It'll rub off or come off in the wash. And you can see there we have a nice line going all the way down there. And then I'm going to do the same here. So I'm just marking the line on the outside of the pins, about 1.5 centimetres, just to allow for that French seam. There we are. The fabric has become a bit skewed, as mine has here. And now's the time just to sort of line it back up again. The original pins are in. Just double check everything's where it should be, because this fabric is lovely, but it can often move and wriggle about on your table. What I'm going to do now is, before I sew it, I'm just going to put some pins through all of the layers across, all the way following the line, just to help to keep the two pieces together where I need them to be. So that's that side, and we've sandwiched the two sides together with the wrong sides together there. And then over to this one. Just try when you get to the end and make sure that the end meets up. It'll save you having to remake that seam. So if you have to slightly pull it out of line in order for it to meet up, do so, because like I say, we're chopping these bits off. So these bits don't matter too much that they're not quite meeting. But this point and this point and this point and this point, if they can meet up, it will allow the dress to have that lovely point where it comes up at the sides. So we're going to stitch all the way down these lines, both the lines, as we go down. And then just feed it all the way in, following your line as you go. Now, because obviously this is cut, we're stitching on the bias, we try and keep a nice straight line as you go, pulling out the pins as you go and losing them as I do in the fabric. So have your pin dish handy. There we are. And again, just follow it down. Don't sew over your pins. It's bad for the machine, it's bad for you if it breaks. Okay. And then a forwards and backwards at the end, just to finish it off. So there we are. We have this lovely nice neat row of stitches all the way down there, which starts and finishes on the seams there. So take the pins out, make sure there's no other pins got stuck in it, there we are, and trim off the edges. So any loose bits of cotton, trim them off. Right, and then we're going to flip this round and we're going to do the same on this side. So again, we're going to follow this chalk line all the way down. And we're going to remove the pins as we go, just like we did before. Doorbell. Carrying on. So, removing the pins as we go, stitching all this line. Just as we go through, just keeping that line nice and straight. Don't push, don't pull, just guide it through at the line. Just do a couple of backwards and forwards stitches there. Lovely. So there we have it. So there we have, you can see the dress is starting to take shape. Okay, so what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to just check it on our Miriam and make sure that we're happy with it, so that if we do need to move any of those, we can. So just while it's this way with the side flaps on and everything else, before we cut anything off, we're just going to check it on the lovely Miriam. As you can see, this is the dress starting to take shape. This section here is going to be folded to the inside and we'll have the cord pass through it. So we're going to make a channel there. I'm just going to pop a couple of pins in so I can have a good look. Obviously, if this is you, you need to try it on, have a look in the mirror. You can't pin yourself. But if you do wear a t-shirt underneath it or a vest top, you can actually pin to your clothing, which I often do when I'm sewing for myself. So if we turn this around, again, let's just fold. We're just guesstimating here, it just wants to hold it in place, so we don't need to worry too much. So just pinning it roughly. And what I just want to check more than anything is that you've got this lovely movement of the fabric. I don't want it to be tight. So obviously taking those hip measurements, it's falling over the hips. There's still room to move your legs, there's still room to walk. If Miriam had legs and could walk, she could walk. So let's take this off. We're happy with that. Put all those in there. Miriam's lost her head by the look of it. Right, there we are. Let's take this off. We're ready to do the next stage. If you're happy with that, it fits, it feels comfortable, that's fine. If not, adjust the lines, get your unpicker out and pick the lines and start again. So now we're going to finish off the sides and get rid of these flappy bits off the sides. We do need to keep these. These are going to be the reconstructed to make around the neck, so the neckline. Right. I'm going to mark out 1/2 centimetre away from the original seam line. So I want to keep it really close so that when I fold it back round, I'm then encasing that in a 1 centimetre seam allowance. I'll show you once it's cut. So I'm just making sure that's all the way down, and I'm just going to mark it out with chalk so that I can double check that before I cut it off. That's lined up. If you don't have one of these handy see-through rulers, then of course you can just use your tape measure to mark out the 1/2 centimetre and put a line. So that's fine. So now, making sure that there's nothing underneath it, we can then go along and snip off this whole edge here. Okay, just obviously keep it as close to the stitching as you can without going too close. So if you can go a little bit closer, then obviously do so. Stitch all the way, snip all the way down here through both layers of fabric of the flappy sort of side bits. There we are. So we have the 2 triangles cut off, and we have this edge, which will be the side. Let's do the other side before we seal that in. Obviously these are raw edges we're leaving, so we do need to encase them. If you had an overlocker, obviously you could sew them with the right sides together and overlock that seam. But with this sort of fabric, it's quite nice to finish it off with a nice French seam. It gives it a lovely, beautiful finish. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do this one. I'm going to use my roller cutter for this one. It's just quicker. Obviously, if you don't have one, just use your scissors, and I'm just going to do it by eye because I've done it that many times. I think I can. But obviously be careful, take care, use a ruler and mark it out if you want to, but there we are. So there we have it, the dress. So this will be how it fits on Miriam's seams. So here we have the rough edge here, and this will fray if we leave it like this. So what we're going to do, we have we're going to turn it and we're going to re-stitch along here. So we're going to turn it so that the seam, which is there, is going to be hidden inside another row of stitches. So I'm just going to go and press this out, and then it'll be nice and flat on both sides. Press it out, turn the seam allowance to the one side. So I've pressed the seams, so now they're sitting and laying a lot flatter, okay? With the neat edge, and the raw edge is on the inside. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do another row of stitches. My sewing machine has a 1 centimetre marker, so I'm going to use that as my guide. If you don't have a 1 centimetre marker, then there's some great little magnetic guides you can get that stick onto the plate, or you can just mark it out again. So as you go down that line, if you haven't pre-marked it or pressed it or pinned it, just make sure along this edge is the seam line of the previous one. And as you go again, quick forwards, backwards to begin with. Just make sure as you go down that you're not pulling again. You want it to just be fed through by the feed dogs of the sewing machine. Keep it nicely lined up to that 1 centimetre. You really do want that seam to be encased. And if I just, while it's still doing it, if I just open that out and show you there, you have a lovely edge there with no seam showing whatsoever. And the raw seam is hidden inside of there. So when you do your sample try on of your dress, just make sure you remember that another 4 centimetres is coming out of that, because of when you do your new seam. If it feels a little bit snug, make sure that you let it out a little bit. And backwards and forwards at the end. I like to go backwards and forwards a few times on that last seam, because it's obviously the seam that's going to take a bit of strain when you're walking. So just snip this off, and there we can see we have this lovely seam now all the way down here. A little bit of print coming through, but a beautiful seam that's encased completely with a lovely French seam. Here we turn to the inside. Now on mine, in an attempt to keep this as simple as possible, I'm going to leave this triangle of fabric to sit on the inside, okay? It will act like a piece of facing and you won't see it. If you did want to finish it off, then you just need to allow that little bit extra and do a double fold so that you have a channel for it to sit into and no raw edge. I'm taking mine down about, let's say, about 10 centimetres. It'll give us enough for it to gather slightly around the neck, which is what we want, just to gather it in to allow the fullness for the bust. So if we take it about 10 centimetres, again, this is down to personal choice, how much of a line you would prefer, or whether you'd like it a higher neck, a lower neck, it all depends on you. And you can ascertain exactly how deep you want that when you try it on. Again, I'm doing the same with the other. I'm measuring 10 centimetres from the triangular point, and I'm just going to put some pins in to mark the channels that I'm going to sew. There we are. As you can see, this is the outside of the dress, so I've folded forward, so this is the inside of the dress, and we've just turned these triangles in like so, and then the channel for the necktie is going to go into here. So, depending on how wide you want your necktie, personally I like a nice shoestring, perhaps slightly wider than the shoestring strap. Obviously your stitches from the edge need to allow that to move forward and backwards through it to allow you to tighten or loosen the neckline. I'm stitching 1.5 centimetres from this upper edge, so I'm just putting the pins in place. Just lining it up again. I have a marking on my sewing machine for 1.5 centimetres, which is handy. So just make sure that when you do your forwards, backwards to hold it in place, just stop a little bit further in. You don't need to go right to the edges, it's not necessary. There we are. Just trim off my cotton. There we go, that's fine. And there we have it. So the only thing left to do now is to do the neck piece. Now this is, I'm going to use these pieces. I'm going to just chop this off here and make this the tie, but I'm going to have to piece some pieces together. So I'm just chopping off that piece there, which is what I want to use to be my necktie. Now when that's sewn in, I need to get rid of this hem because that will create bulk that I don't want. So you probably can't see, but there's a tiny weeny rolled hem here that was on the edge. There we are. So this is what we're going to use, but I just need to put a few together. So I'm just going to line them up so that the right sides are together and do a little seam down there to join them together. So now this is the necktie. So obviously it's joined in several places, that's fine. I'll press those flat in a moment. What we're going to do is we're going to fold it so that the right sides are together, so all the roughness is on the outside, and we're just going to sew all the way along that edge there. I'm just going to press all these nice and flat so they don't cause a problem when I'm sewing. And we're going to stitch along the long edge so we've got the rough pieces there. Okay, so I'm just going to stitch. I'm using my guide on here, 1 centimetre guide, and just feed this seam bulk underneath, lining up the edges as you go. Fine. So now we need to turn this inside out. So if you have a bodkin, use one. I can't remember what I've done with mine, so I'm going to use a safety pin, the good old tried and tested safety pin. So just safety pin. If it's fragile fabric, I tend to go through a fold and back through a fold, so you're going through sort of a clump of fabric rather than just one little layer near the edge. And what we're going to do now is we're going to push the safety pin down inside the channel that we've just made, and as we go, to start off with, just pinch the top. I'm sure you've all turned something inside out like a, but just be careful at the top edge because of all the frayed fabric, and you don't want to put unnecessary strain on it, and you've got a lot of fabric to get down through there. So just pulling gently on each side as it goes down. A bodkin does make life a lot easier, but once you get going it's fine. There we are. So we have the strap all finished. Just need to tidy up the edges, so I'm just going to snip off the edges, and I'm just going to do a double fold there and just sew along there. And following it all the way down, keep without twisting it. We have the other edge here. Safety pin, and again I'm just going to chop that off and do a double fold there and just stitch that down. Right, so there we have it. I'm just going to press that flat. So now this here needs to go through this channel here, all the way around, loop round and go through that channel there, depending on which side you want to tie on. There's no front or back on this, it doesn't matter which is which. So I'm just going to use my safety pin again, put it in the end of here, and I'm just going to feed it through this channel that we made earlier. There we are. And then I'm going to loop it round and take it through this one here, like so. Take that out of there, and there you have your dress. So, and here we are, we're ready to go. So we're just going to take the dress and we're going to pop it onto Miriam. Take hold of the two ends. Now this needs to, like I mentioned earlier, a little gather just to allow for the fullness of the bust. Little bow. And there we are. Ta-da! The dress is done. Okay, so if you now want to make a belt for it, if you prefer it to be pulled in slightly, the extra pieces that you didn't use, same way that we created this ribbon round here, you can create a belt to go around the middle in the same fabric, which will just tie it all in together, or just wear it as a loose beach slip. And I think that's fabulous. So all made from 2 scarves which otherwise were to go in the trash or not wanted, not needed, and now you have this beautiful dress, which is great. And I love it. Thanks ever so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos. I'll be bringing you tutorials, alteration tutorials, Let's stop wasting fabric. Let's make the most of what we've got. Let's reuse. If you've got any comments, like projects that you'd like me to look at, any ideas you want, anything you want me to work on, please let me know in the comments and I'll see what I can do. As I said, this is the first in a series of weekly tutorials that I'll be doing, along with upcycling projects of my own that I'll be making and involving you in. So I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks very much.